If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phish credentials are useless to attackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is, you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Visit securityweekly.com/Collide to watch a demo today. That's securityweekly.com/KOLIDE. Do the words free time or relaxation sound foreign to you? Perhaps you've been stuck in the office too long, battling cyber threats or worrying about the next strain of ransomware. Let Sophos help provide peace of mind 24/7, 365 with cybersecurity delivered as a service. Because we want you to get back to your weekends, family dinners, and everything in between. And you'll get there with Sophos. Visit securityweekly.com/Sophos to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join us at SE Media's Investing in IAM eSummit, September 19th through 20th. This two-day virtual event will provide insights from industry experts with a deep dive into identity and access management. Register now for this free event where you will gain cybersecurity knowledge and receive 6.5 CPE credits just for attending. Register today at securityweekly.com/IAM. All right, and now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. If you want to follow along, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW331. That will be the show notes for this entire episode, which includes the news segment and links to all the stories that we're going to talk about today. And some of my sometimes sarcastic, snide notes about some of the stories. All right. So we have some funding and we have some acquisitions. None of them are getting me all that excited to talk about. And we've got a ton of stuff to talk about here. So I might breeze through some of that. Just do some highlights here. Rapid7, which IPO'd many years ago. They've been public for a number of years. They did some a post-IPO debt raise. So another $260 million of equity that you can pick up there in Rapid7 if you like that company. No comments from Guillaume, who used to work there.
I mean, I still have I think they gave us a Kenneth Cole laptop bag when we did the IPO. I still have it somewhere in a closet. Never used it. I figured, one day that's going to be a collectible. And I also made like several dozens of dollars from the IPO. So I think, I'm conflicted. I cannot comment on this story.
Several dozens.
I mean, you could buy some Waffle House, right?
Amazing. I will use all those proceeds for some Waffle House.
Might also be able to get several dozens of dollars for that Kenneth Cole bag on eBay.
Yep. Yeah, I'm waiting. Huddle.
Hold on. Also notable, Lee Honeywell's Tall Poppy is among 23 companies funded by Morgan Stanley. So it's one of these things where they divide up. I don't know if it was like an accelerator or how exactly that works. I don't know a lot about the process, but it kind of feels like that, right? Like one of those accelerators where everybody gets $250,000 or $50K or something like that, and they go through like a 2-week process. It looks like maybe they just applied for it. Yeah, and it looks like maybe some additional benefits from Morgan Stanley opening up their ecosystem of partners, so they're going to help with lead generation. So it looks like
it is an accelerator program. What I found interesting is there's a few Canadian companies on the list. Some that I don't know, Uppos and AdOris, didn't really know these companies, and it was fun to see, some Canadian tech companies out there.
Yeah. I missed the fact that they have the country that each company is headquartered in. There's an Estonian one on there, a few UK, Uganda. Yeah, very cool. Let's see. Acquisitions, SafeBase acquiring Staxi. SafeBase, they've raised a decent amount of money. I'm guessing any of the acquisitions that we see, I think, are all going to be good deals for the buyers, less so for the sellers in this market. So it's kind of my assumption, because we don't really get any deal amounts anyway. So to me, that's another sign that the companies getting bought aren't making a huge bank. That the amount is not material to having to report for some of these companies that are public, like Checkpoint acquired Atmosec. Tenable picked up a vendor called Hermetic. Sometimes we find out like the next 10Q or 10K, they'll have the amount in there, and we'll eventually find out how much they paid. But none of these were in the press releases.
When there's a public company that's involved, right? If it's going to be two privately owned companies and they don't disclose it, we'll probably never know. But that one I think is interesting, like SafeBase and Staxi, for security reviews. I think it could be a pretty good fit. We use SafeBase at Jupiter One, and it's a nice product, and that's a different feature that maybe is going to fit well in there. So, it's nice to see people buying things that might actually be useful yet fit with their existing product and company, right? Like, it doesn't feel like just, okay, we're acquiring 62 things because we're trying to do everything as fast as possible, and then you'd never know how well integrated it's going to be. And so this one, I'm actually cautiously optimistic. I think if they integrate it properly, it might be a win for customers. So
yeah, I met those folks at because the company I work for was in Innovation Sandbox, and I believe the SafeBase folks were also there. They're one of the 10 companies, so I got to meet them there. Yeah, so with public companies, even they don't have to share the amount if it's low enough. If they determine that it's not material. So sometimes you'll see that they'll throw it into the next 10Q or something like that, but you won't see an 8K for it. Sometimes you never see it, because I do go back and check occasionally on some of these. The Ironnet drama looks like it may have completed. They furloughed workers. They're exploring bankruptcy. I don't know. It's been there's been a lot of drama with that. There's lawsuits against the company. Accusations, different kinds. They went public via SPAC. There's not a whole lot of success companies for businesses in general that went public via SPAC, even less for cybersecurity companies. I think ZeroFox is still doing okay. They haven't been delisted, but their price they're trading at is fairly low. So yeah, we'll see. For Ironnet, it doesn't look like it's there's going to be much of a happy ending here.
It's just been such a mess from the start, and I know that the SPAC craze was pretty big for a while, but to me, it's just a word of caution that it's one thing you want to make your company go. It's one thing you want to try new ways of investment and making sure that your business is on track. But at least, again, for me personally, it's a word of caution to not try something 100% that hasn't been tested and vetted in the marketplace, because there really just hasn't been a lot of evidence that this was ever going to work well. So,
it felt to me like, how you can storage places auction off like abandoned storage units. That's how SPACs kind of felt to me. Like you were investing in something you didn't know anything about. You couldn't do any due diligence on it. It was a pure gamble. And, as a tool to avoid scrutiny and due diligence, you got exactly what you would expect to get. You would get companies going public that didn't want scrutiny or due diligence for some reason. So, after the SEC changed some rules, I forget exactly what they changed to make SPACs less attractive. It looks like companies are just going to go back to the classic S1 path, filing an S1 and going IPO. So they can still do there still is an option for a private S1 path. I think you can still do that, where the S1 isn't public. And S1 being the document you have to file before going IPO, not to be confused with Sentinel-1. I've seen that confusion happen in a few places online. So just to be clear, we're not talking about Sentinel-1. We're talking about the S1 document you file with the SEC.
Yes, that's an important distinction, for sure.
It is. I found that out the other day. Let's see. So there's a new open source tool, Hoppr. I forget. I think this came from Lockheed Martin, maybe. Yeah, it's a SBOM and secure software supply chain utility kit. Beyond that, I don't know a ton about it.
Yeah, it seems to be really focused around all this supply chain security, supply chain management, which is pretty hot topic. We've been talking about SBOMs for years now, and the tooling is finally starting to be coming together. Producing them has gotten pretty easy depending on your environment. Of course, consuming them and figuring out what to do with all of the information, and probably not as easy yet, but it's nice to see more open source tools around that. So companies that don't have all the resources to develop this custom stuff can reuse that without having to spend money on commercial solutions.
Yeah. Anywhere you guys from this point we could jump pretty much anywhere. We don't have to go through this in order. Are there any particular ones that grabbed you that you want to discuss next?
The Gmail one, actually. So Google now has a feature that will essentially do like second factor verification when you do specific sensitive actions, right? So for example, you set up a new mail forwarding rule, which is something that happens pretty often when an email account is compromised, right? Like they set up the mail forwarding rule so that they can keep receiving the stuff even if you reset your password. I think this is great. I also want to mention, if anyone out there is a Google Workspace admin, there's many things in Google Workspace that don't have full API support, so you can't really terraform your entire Google Workspace configuration. However, they just released, and I think it's still beta, so it's still rolling out. You may or may not have it yet, multi-party approval for admins. So you can now make it so a single Google administrator is not enough to change some of the critical security features. And I think that is super important because we know like people will target a person that they know has administrator access to something like Office 365, Google Workspace that gives so much access into a company. So it's really cool that they're releasing that. I think they announced it 3 weeks ago, but it was within one of these blog posts about like Duet AI. It's like 62 new AI features, and then at the bottom, multi-party approval. And felt like I was the only person in the world that was more excited for that than any of the AI features. Like, yay, finally.
So like M of N support, where me and you have to turn the key to add a new user. Like what's an example of something you'd use multi-party support for? What's like a really sensitive operation you would want to do?
You turn off. You change your requirements for two-factor, for example. Then you will need multi-party approval, right? So I'll change it, and then someone's going to get a notification. They'll have to log in and go approve it. So actually, it is in preview. So they've shown it. There's screenshots of it, but I don't think most customers have it yet. So keep an eye on it, and as soon as you get it, turn it on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's one of those, like, I'm surprised it took this long for that to show up. I haven't seen that in anything else either.
Well, I mean, you can do it on anything that's infrastructure as code, right? Like the idea is you put the infrastructure code in, let's say, GitHub repository. You make sure you have code reviews on that, and you make sure that
but then it's not a SaaS
anything that can go and make the actual change.
Multi-party process yourself, right?
Right. But because Google Workspace, it's not everything that can be automated in the Google Workspace configuration, at least not easily and cleanly. Then this is really good. This is also really good for anyone who, there's so many companies using something like Google Workspace that just don't have the resources to be able to use something like Terraform, right? Like it's not going to happen. And so now that's pretty good solution for those. So yay.
It's great. It's like a security check at a bank, right? Like if you go into a bank vault, you've got to have two different keys to get into the bank vault. It makes sense. Sometimes these changes might not necessitate such governance, but it's a good best practice.
I think the probably most similar thing that I see quite frequently is actually controls for controlling how much money a company can wire, for example. So if you have okay, we just said, Rapid7 is probably going to have $260 million in the bank soon, right? Like, you just know scammers will start targeting them. And so I assume they have some tools that will say you cannot wire $260 million to one account without multiple approvals. Most business banking solutions support that, but in terms of IT products, it's actually fairly rare. The only time I'd seen that as like a feature that's pretty easy to enable without requiring some infrastructure as code or automation has actually been in the finance space, either like banking products or like I've worked in banking quite a bit. So a lot of like the back end tools that you aren't exposed to as a customer, some of them have that, but then it's more like ERPs, right? Like, oh, you have the permission to approve a check, but then you're not going to have the permission to print it as well, right? So it's that segmentation of duty in a way just made a little simpler.
Yeah, I still have a credit union account set up that way where I can't do anything with the account, even deposit money without giving them a password. As soon as they pull up my account, there's a note on it that says, "Hey, they have to answer this password before they can do anything."
Yeah, I know. I tried to give you a few bucks the other day, and I didn't know the password. Could not deposit.
You're supposed to send crypto. Why are you using a credit union? But yeah, it was a big feature for CASB. So this is one of I remember back when I was an industry analyst and CASB was just coming out. This is one of the big use cases that I don't think a lot of people used. But the example they like to use is, okay, if I'm going into Paychex or ADP or something like that and changing somebody's salary, we want to do this step-up authentication. It says, hey, just to make sure we're also sending this there, and somebody's got to approve
salary
that before.
Or the bank account it goes to, right? Like the amount of emails I've seen in the last 10 years just saying like, "Hi, this is Adrian. I'm on vacation. Please make sure my next paycheck goes to this random bank account," right? Like,
I can give you my bank account number if you'd like to do that. You can just funnel it through there.
I wouldn't want to run afoul of some international money laundering law accidentally. So.
That's why you got to use crypto. Come on, Gil. There's no borders anymore.
There's no laws.
Katie, anything you want to jump to?
The CISA ones are pretty interesting. The Federal Programs Risky Biz announcement about CISA providing free security scans to utilities. Obviously, I want a little more detail into that and what it means, but we certainly need this kind of collaboration and cooperation, and I think it's great to be focusing on these public utilities that don't have the wherewithal, they don't necessarily have the budget, and it's a big risk.
The open source one as well, right? I thought when the White House released their like new cyber strategy, or I forget what it's the exact name of it was. What was it, like 6 months ago? I don't know. Like
I think it was just COVID, the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Yeah.
And one of the things I thought was missing in there was they just really didn't talk much about open source. So like, I don't know, like the devil's in the detail. We're going to see, is it really going to be useful? But for open source to be more of a focus there, I think that's great, because there's so many of these tools that everyone is using, so many libraries that everyone is using, and you don't know, right? Like it could be maintained by just a few volunteers. Sometimes only one person is really committing to it, and that's not great. So I'm pretty happy about that too. It's nice to have a week where we have probably more good news than bad news.
Yeah, I think this is, the thing with open source is it's so prevalent. We're never going to get to all of it. So any little step forward is a good step forward for not just the community, but for businesses.
Yeah, and for the vulnerability one, it looks like CISA basically runs like a scanning service, that you can purchase, subscribe to. I'm not sure how any of that works, in terms of cost centers within the government, or how you get access to it. But kind of cool that
they're supposed to be free, right? Like you're not supposed to have to pay for that, I think.
Right. Free access to its vulnerability scanning service to the operators of public U.S. water and wastewater utilities. This is completely voluntary. Water utilities that sign up will receive a weekly status report with details about the exposed systems and vulnerabilities that will need to be patched. As Guillaume just said, the devil's in the details. You can say, hey, here are 1,000 things that are wrong. And if they don't have the capability to patch any of those, then it's information without action. But this hopefully will lead to greater awareness, perhaps some budget for attending to this, some skills building. We were just talking about that in the last section. Hopefully
we live in this world, right? Like we know, like if you have a big enough network, there's 15,000, there's 1 million vulnerabilities or whatever. Like that doesn't surprise us because we have the experience. We've been exposed to all of this. But if someone out there was not doing any type of vulnerability scanning because they didn't have the budget for it, right, and they don't know that, like, oh wow, having SMB exposed to the internet and like remote desktop and like unpatched remote desktop, these types of things, and maybe that's the first time they ever see a vulnerability scan, it might make them realize that, okay, there's actually some work that needs to be done here. So I think this is not a lot of security people are going to see this service, right? Because a company that has a security team probably already has tools to do that. So I think it's going to expose some IT people to, one type of security tool. So, why not? We'll see. It might just generate, as you say, a lot of information and not a lot of action in terms of fixing things. But, it's more information.
And I think at least at the beginning, this will target some low-hanging fruit like OpenSMB. They might not be able to patch some critical systems that were OT systems, legacy systems that can't be patched easily, or some interconnectivity issues might arise. But at very least, it will hopefully, as long as they have a diligent IT or security team, it will close up some of the lower gaps so that eventually they can start putting programs together to target more thorough proactive security programs that includes an actual patching program or things of that nature.
And the other benefit here is, I presume they're doing some prioritization for them as well, because the CISA also manages the known exploited vulnerabilities list, which is like a short list of really, really bad stuff. That's, if you have in your environment, is going to lead to a very bad day with some kind of ransomware crew. So if they can already do some of that work for them, rather than just hand them a spreadsheet of a billion things, unsorted things, like that's really going to help out these guys a lot more. Because it done wrong, like this could be just another problem for them. Right. Oh, you're welcome. Here's an 863-page report of vulnerabilities. Like no action is ever going to be taken on that, by the two IT people that work at this one public water utility, right?
I got 99 problems and a security team ain't one because I don't got one. At least in the thing they outlined here, there is an execution that CISA performs a scan and then they rescan based on criticality of identified vulnerabilities. And then they do deliver some reports with recommendations. Again, if there isn't a security team that can handle it, what are we going to do? Are we just going to scare the bejesus out of a lot of utilities? Maybe. But I assume at this stage, most major utility companies have at least some form of security help, whether it's internal or external through an MSSP or what have you. Guillaume's making faces. For those of you who can't see, he's looking skeptical at my last statement, or he's reading something totally different.
No, I just I was actually looking at the screenshot of the UI, and so for utilities, I don't have a good understanding of how many smaller utility providers are out there, right? Like, I'm from Montreal, or water or like electricity, all that is run by the government, and so we have one power company and one gas company, so they're all very, very big. I guess it's probably different in the US, right?
It is very different.
Yeah.
I have those stats. Give me a second and I'll find those stats, because I actually did that research a couple years ago. And it's
and while you're looking that up, I'll describe the UI a little bit for people who are listening, and can't just like click the link and check it out. But one of the things they put on the top left of the report, pretty much top left, is potentially risky open services. But then the other thing I like is they show the percentage, the change in vulnerable hosts, right? So I assume that'll be plus 50%, minus 50%. But I think the most telling part of this UI is you look at the bottom right, potentially risky open services, and then it totally focuses on RDP, FTP, RPC, SQL, LDAP, Kerberos, and put the funniest one in there in that list is IRC. Why is IRC one of these? There's only 10 ports that they're highlighting here. So there has to be a reason why IRC is one of them. And I want to know, like, it was someone doing a command and control by running the IRC server on the breach side? Or is it just because some people set up some really old IRC servers to actually communicate internally within the company, right? Like, people joke that Slack is just IRC with GIFs. So is it because utilities have been using IRC and accidentally exposing that to the internet? If anyone knows, I'd love to know why IRC is one of the top 10.
Maybe there's some acronym collision there, and IRC has a different meaning in that kind of environment.
I don't know. The port number is not listed, so
right.
I guess the only way to find out is we open up our own water utility, and then we open a few ports and we wait to see if it's 6667.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having trouble finding that. I posted there is a Twitter thread where I go through the number of electric utilities and water utilities. It's a huge number, and a lot of them are, like, in some places they're entirely volunteers. There's no FTEs, no full-time employees in the water utilities at all. It's like the same guy who's the fire chief also runs the the water treatment plant or something like that.
Yeah, I figured there's so many variations in how all the different states are run. Like, I can't really keep track, right, as someone who lives in a different country, but I figured you probably had a lot. Like, even other Canadian provinces, I don't know how it is. Maybe we have a ton, but I think water is probably the one that we have the most of, because a lot of it is municipal. And so there's a lot of smaller cities that probably don't have a huge staff. So I think it's more likely here that be water more than, not like a power company without a security team.
I just asked, I do have a spreadsheet somewhere that lists all of them, but I just asked ChatGPT. I went the quick route, and it says there's over 50,000.
So I just Googled, and it said of the more than 151,000 public water systems in the United States, 97%, 146,767 are considered small water systems.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So ChatGPT was wrong, but I mean, yeah, it's a lot is basically what we were looking for there. It's a very difficult to manage number, and you have to understand that to understand the kind of undertaking that CISA is taking here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we jump to some of the Sean, we actually have some hot takes here. I think we've got a dumpster fire as well, if you want to prep some graphics, but not there quite yet. I wanted to talk about number 20, which I found fascinating because this was a breach that Brazil did to themselves. They apparently shared some sensitive data of their citizens with private industry, with banks and private financial institutions, and basically a judge said that they've got to pay the 15,000 reais, the equivalent of $3,000 US, to everyone whose data was leaked, purposely leaked, and that's like 3.7 million people's data. So it comes up to $11 billion, which I did some more research and found that's more than the estimated damage of NotPetya and WannaCry. And so possibly this could be the biggest breach ever. But chatting with some of my Brazilian friends, I found that, even though the judge has said this, it could take years for them to pay this out. Brazil does this thing where it'll pay people when it has surpluses, so you got to wait until the government has some extra money to pay out. So who knows when you get this, or if you get all of it, it's kind of not a real solid number.
I don't think it qualifies as the most expensive breach because it's not really a breach,
it's a
right?
breach,
like it's misuse of data, but it's more like a
intentional data leak. Yeah.
Well, it's like a business decision that was probably not quite legal or something like that, but it's not a breach.
Yeah, that sounds like malicious attack or gross negecience.
It was self-inflicted.
There was no attacker.
But when the attacker's you, why are you hitting yourself?
It still applies, right?
It's a lot of data anyway, so.
A lot of data. And people are probably not, some people might not live long enough to actually get their payout, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, but for once, it's what, $3,000 per person, right? Which is a nice change from all these class action lawsuits that result in me receiving an email saying, if you bought a TV in 1996, you could get up to 17 cents.
What's really funny is I was thinking 17 cents before you said that. No, I'm not kidding. I was thinking, that's weird. Okay.
I'm probably basing it on some actual class action that was literally 17 cents. Maybe we both kind of remember that. I don't know.
Maybe. I definitely haven't gotten 17 cents because I figured the paperwork and all the time it takes me to fill out the paperwork to get my 17 cents, it's just not worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've passed on a couple of those. But yeah, I mean, the thing here is all the people whose data was leaked were generally people in poverty. So like 15,000 reais is kind of a big deal. Like that's a significant chunk of an annual salary at minimum wage.
Yeah. So it's a actual, I mean, even from the incentive to not do this in the future, when you see fines like that's way different than seeing, let's say, a huge, I'm not going to name names, but huge bank, with massive breaches, and then the only thing they end up doing is buying, a couple of years of Equifax for people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's more like a cost of doing business. This is bigger.
And it will have a substantive impact on people, a very positive substantive impact if they do follow through.
All right, let's move on to hot take number 1. Kelly Shortridge wants to know, why are you logging into production hosts in 2023?
Yep.
Gil?
So that was a good, I mean, to me, it's not a hot take. It's just, why are you doing that? That being said, that's easy to say, as someone who's worked for companies building brand new products in the cloud, automation and all of that. If you work for one of these utilities we just mentioned, 10 minutes ago, then obviously you're going to be logging into production, because I don't think there's like APIs and Terraform and CI/CD for like MATLAB or like all the stuff that must be running in there. So obviously, this is targeted more to tech companies. Like if you're a fintech, you should not have people even be able to log into production. If you have a lot of sensitive data from your customers, you should not have people be able to log in production unless it's like a super emergency. But what I found really funny were just some of the responses. I think a lot of people just completely missed it. It was not an actual question. It's more like, why are you doing it? You should be working on stopping that. And I saw a lot of some very weird responses. But yeah, that's like the most bang for the buck security control you can get, is just making sure that there's no way inside a system so that it is immutable, right? The point with containers is they're supposed to be immutable. Detecting that there's a new executable in a container, a new library, something weird is way easier than on a big system. There's smaller attack surface. But if you're going to open up SSH and have people logging into it to troubleshoot stuff, then what's the point, right? So yeah, not a hot take I disagree with at all.
Perhaps not even a hot take. All right.
I guess it depends on from what point of view you're seeing it. I guess some people did consider it a hot take, but to me, that's good practice and should be standard.
So we have an 8K from Caesars, the hotel and casino chain. An 8K is what you file with the SEC when something happens to your company that maybe your shareholders would be interested in knowing. I think the term is material event. And the language in it, we don't know for sure, but it highly suggests that they paid a ransom within the rumor, the grapevine. I've heard they paid around $30 million. MGM, I'm guessing, did not pay the ransom because they have a bunch of stuff that's broken and offline still, whereas I haven't heard the same about Caesars. And so I'm wondering, so also that 8K describes an outsourced IT support vendor getting social engineered, which sounds suspiciously close to the story coming out of MGM as well, which was also leaked supposedly from the attacker to VX Underground on Twitter, suggesting that maybe there's a chance that the same IT support vendor was the path into both of these large hotels and casinos.
Could be a shared vendor, but could also be, once you've seen the success you got targeting one of them, then why not go after all similar companies, right?
Mm-hmm. We
or
can go to
a combination of both, right?
This kind of qualifies as dumpster fires. We can change the graphic to that. There we go. We can just leave this one on for a bit for the next couple of stories. But yeah, and there has been a trend of that, right? Of attackers going bang for your buck. Like, why hack the company directly when you can hack the company, a company that has access to a whole bunch, and then you have your pick of who you want to jump into.
I mean, as much as when you work in security, it feels like things are not improving much because we're always focusing on like what happened this week, what do we have to do? But if we look over like 10, 15 years, things have improved in many different areas. And I think if like the average level of security of most companies keeps going up a little bit, I think a lot of it just because they're using SaaS tools that are harder to, that you don't have to maintain to patch, they're not exposing their IRC servers on the internet, then it just becomes obvious that attacking the vendor is going to be more bang for the buck because it might be harder to compromise them. But once you're in, you're in.
Right.
To a lot.
Yeah, much better payout. Yeah. Let's see. So we got the dumpster fire one up. That is particularly for number 26, which apparently there's been a rash of just really, really bad CVEs getting filed. So the quality of CVEs and just the fact that these were filed as CVEs at all should be questioned. And thankfully, somebody's actually watching this kind of stuff because honestly, there's so many CVEs every year, 20,000 plus that tend to get filed and published. I don't think there's any one person looking at all of them.
There's also been a few weeks ago, didn't someone report a CVE in like WebGoat or some app that's vulnerable by design, right? The app is made to have SQL injection, and someone reported CVEs for that. I don't, I haven't kept up. I don't know if it's just someone as a joke or just wanted to put the CV number in a resume or whatever. And then a lot of people started complaining about that we shouldn't be submitting CVEs to apps that are made to be vulnerable. But at the same time, I'm thinking it's actually not that bad of a problem in that case, because if you do have that running somewhere, now it kind of acts as like a ICAR test file for your vulnerability scanner in a way, right? So I could see that, but that's a different case from this one, which are actually like bad CVEs and really bad CVSS scores as well, right? It's like 9.8, and this is just we don't need that kind of noise. But it just goes to show that it's 2023 and vulnerability management is still very difficult. We don't have a lot of context, and the little data that we have is not even necessarily great in most cases, right? Like, who remembers that Heartbleed was not a super crazy CVSS score because it was air quote only information disclosure. So this is more of that. And I don't know who's submitting all of these bugs, but please stop. I think you have enough CVEs in your resume now.
Yeah, 138 in one day. These were all.
That's a lot of time. Day. I mean, just
it's probably just people running scanners, right?
But the assumption is that maybe AI is being used to just scrape these and auto write up. You can have AI do the whole thing except for hitting the submit button, pretty much.
Why couldn't it?
And
hit
nobody's
the submit
reviewing
button?
these for quality. Nobody who's validating these before they get published.
Well, a lot of these projects, they don't have dedicated security people, right? And so when they see stuff like that, it just makes every security person out there look bad, right? Because you've got people maintaining open source projects, and their experience maintaining open source projects, like part of that, and having talked to people who maintain open source projects, and I used to work at Fleet, open source company. You get these really bad vulnerability reports, and in some cases the conversation even goes like not super well. The person is not really explaining things properly, and it almost feels like a threat or extortion. You're like, okay, so what is happening here? Why are you threatening me with this? And because of that, when you have actual security researchers who want to do the right thing, there's a lot of these companies that don't have a security team, don't have that much experience with good security people. They're just going to be on the defensive, right? So you'll submit something good, and it's like, whatever, the last 19 CVEs we got were complete junk, not exploitable, and no one cares. It's like if I submitted, I don't know, like a CVE to Netcat to say that, like, it doesn't use TLS by default. Like, that's not the point of the tool. That's not a vulnerability, right? But so if they get used to receiving junk like that, then they will not listen to the good reports. So yeah, definitely has to stop. Yeah. I don't know how we stop it, but
yeah.
So if you say it's AI, then all we need is like some CAPTCHA asking you to pick the school buses from a photo, and then we're good, right?
Right. All right. Let's see. What's next here? Let's see. Yeah, so there was some more information released about Microsoft's the breach they had that been attributed to Storm 0558, which is apparently China, where, again, same type of issue. Instead of hacking these companies' emails individually, they just went after Microsoft, found a way to produce their own keys to get into pretty much any customer accounts that they wanted to, running on Microsoft 365, and chose these 25 particular accounts, which had a lot in common. U.S. government, both U.S. government accounts and U.S. government contractors. So they released some more information. basically found a bunch of issues with their internal processes that they say they've improved. But the thing that kind of fell flat with me is there's still no detail on how the attackers got into or got access to these Microsoft employees in the first place. And, if they can't secure their own employees, the concern here is, how can they expect us to, to handle these kinds of attacks if they don't even have any logging information or data on how this happened? At least that's
I
my
don't
take.
know. Do they not have it, or have they not told us? But I think the weirdest part of it for me is, okay, there was a race condition that caused a crash in some service, and a key ended up in some crash dump, and that crash dump eventually made it to like a troubleshooting environment and whatever. So that part, totally can see that happening. By the way, good case for automated key rotation, because you think keys are not supposed to leak, but there's always going to be something weird with like a crash somewhere or whatever. So if you can automate that, then reduce the risk a little bit.
Unexpected things are going to happen, right?
Exactly. But what here's memory, right? Like here's a big bunch of memory dump. You're going to find weird things in there that shouldn't necessarily be made available in these environments. But what I don't understand is it feels to me like this is less likely than winning the lottery if the scenario was you compromised one machine and it happened to have that on it, right? It's like, I just wanted to deploy a crypto miner and I accidentally hacked into 25 government entities because I saw a dump and it happened to have this key, and I tried to forge Azure or 365 tokens with it. So I'm wondering, what is the real scenario? Were there more machines that were compromised? Did that last for a long time? I think it's also not that likely, because if I remember right, that breach was discovered by a customer that was looking at their Office 365 logs, right? And I'm thinking, if someone compromised, a couple hundred Windows machines at Microsoft to look for this type of stuff over a certain period of time, Microsoft probably would have detected it first. And so I think we're missing information. I would love to know more about it, just from I'm very curious about how did that really play out, because I just don't think it can be pure luck. I mean, if it was really pure luck, there's like a junior APT engineer that got promoted to VP of ownage 2 days later, right? Like it just doesn't make much sense. But it's a really interesting attack path. I think if you're a cloud vendor, definitely people are going to be looking for your crash dump. So time to deploy some Yarrow rules to find the crash dumps in places you don't expect them.
Right. Yeah, and this is so it sounds like there's probably going to be some larger investigations into it, maybe by the U.S. government. So we might get a much more detailed report 18 months from now, 2 years from now. I think it took about 18 months for the Equifax one we were talking about with Chris Sanders to come out after the actual incident occurred. So, but this probably isn't the last that we've heard of this.
Yeah, most likely not. Looking forward to it.
I want to talk about number 27, and then we'll jump to our squirrel story, and we'll wrap up. But number 27 is a big one. It's not really cybersecurity, but definitely adjacent in many, many, many ways to cybersecurity, right? Because privacy is, tends to fall under. Would you say that tends to fall under the purview of the CISO more often or less often? Guillaume?
In many cases it does, and I think if it's a big consumer product brand, though, you will usually have a person that's specifically responsible for privacy. And I think like cars are pretty much consumer goods, right? Especially with like all these features. We're not talking about trucks sold for companies only. This is in every car. I just love they didn't shy away from the words here. Modern cars are a privacy nightmare in bold. And it's interesting because I think it's something that like we all kind of, we know, right? Like I never did any research into that, but that cars that are connected to the internet are going to be a privacy nightmare, right? Your like GPS data is always going to be uploaded back. That's probably not going to be protected super well from like a privacy protection. Who can get access to that? If law enforcement wants that data, will they really require the right due process and a warrant and all that? I just always assume it was a train wreck. but it's probably worse than we assume. So it's really nice to see someone that actually did the work.
Yeah.
And then you just scroll through, and it's like you look at the logos, and you're like, okay, so which brand is not there, right? And you would have to really look for it to find one, and then you realize like, oh no, actually that brand went bankrupt. They don't exist anymore. That's why they're not there. It's pretty much every single one. The weirdest thing in it though is not like, we all feel like, yeah, sure, they're spying on location data, right? Like they're just uploading that and it's there and it's stored. Will they use it for marketing purposes? Whatever. That's the kind of stuff we assume will happen. Why do you have brands going and specifically mentioning that the data they collect might include information about your sexual activity?
Yeah.
Do they want to improve like the back seat on their cars based on how the cars are being used? I don't know, but I found it so weird to see that in there. And I'm thinking, is it a case of like copy pasta? Like people are copy pasting different privacy policies and then just like adding everything to be sure everything is in there? Is really weird.
So it's a bit of important context we should mention here is a lot of this is just analysis of the privacy policies that these car companies have published. So they're reading the words that these car companies put together that was approved by lawyers with language like, we can collect information about your sex life. That was actually approved and went out. Somebody said,
I figured they just want to be sure that they cover 100% of everything, right? Like, oh, it wasn't there. You approved that when you started the car the first time. I don't know. It's like these 60-page long end user license agreements when you just want to install a new app, right? Like no one actually reads that. Well, now someone did. Thank you, Mozilla.
Well, it's not even just installing a new app. It's worse than that.
No, this is way worse, right? Because you've bought the car by the time you see that, right? Like it's done. And also, what are you going to do? Buy one of the other brands that also does the same thing?
Yeah. So
how big is the insurance company wanting you to have a dongle in your car industry in the US? That's something that's picking up here, where the insurance company wants you to report GPS data so they can adjust your rates based on your driving.
Yeah, so Progressive, and it's not a dongle anymore. So that's built into the car. So all they need is like the VIN of your. I don't know how they set it up because I don't own a car that can do that. But I do know you no longer need the OBD2 dongle because they can do it direct from the car. The car company can basically just pipe that information straight to the insurance company. And I'm not sure how broad it is, but I think Progressive was the one that started with it. And I think it has extended out to others. I don't think my car insurance company does that. So I don't have a good sense of how common that is these days.
Because there's a weird double standard where when we started getting things like speed cameras, right? Red light cameras, there was actually debate around the privacy implications of that, right? Because now there's a camera that saw you drive through and it has to do OCR on your license plate. And now I can say, okay, so the Adrian's car was at that place at 8:33, whatever. Maybe I see your face in a photo. They started blanking them at some point. But then you have the insurance companies that are going to collect all that, and then the car companies that are just collecting all of that anyway, right? So what does it even matter?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely worth a read if you own or are planning on owning a modern vehicle. There's a lot of good details in there. Not a whole lot. You can sign a
petition as well.
Yeah. Not a whole lot that you can do about it. Aside from signing that petition, it's just like, if you want a modern car, it's very unlikely that you'd be able to avoid this. Almost everybody's doing it. Nobody got a good grade, in other words, on privacy. And so jumping down to, and this is 31 and 34 are kind of connected. We can go ahead and call this the squirrel story. But yeah, we're now starting to see tools that help you detect audio, and I think I've seen ones for video as well, help detect deepfakes. But then number 34 is about a service intended for you to create your own deepfake, to kind of like, I guess if you have enough, if there's enough video or audio files of you and your voice, say, I don't know, you do 3 hours of a podcast every week and publish all that to YouTube, you can create a virtual avatar of someone. So if that's something you want, if you want Adrian to live on forever, making dad jokes and fart jokes, I guess technology has reached that point. I don't know why you'd want to.
Black Mirror, but I think the detection of voice deepfake or audio deepfake, that's going to be a cat and mouse game for a while, right? Because there's banks that use actual voice biometric stuff.
Yeah.
I have no idea, like scientifically, how effective that was to begin with, but I would assume that it's getting harder and harder to do voice biometrics, especially over phone. You call your friend who's on LTE or 5G, you're on LTE or 5G, you get HD, but you call a company, it always sounds like crap, right? So the bandwidth there is like everything is compressed. So how do they really identify you when there's like all these tools to simulate your voice? I just wish more companies would have two-factor for any type of support, right? Like and actually there's a few banks that do it now. When you go to the branch, unfortunately it's usually SMS, but they will send you a two-factor code to your phone to identify you. I think when I call my phone company, they should send a push notification to an app on my phone, and I can say, yes, I want, Marie from support to have access to my account for 30 minutes, because it's just like, we are not going to be able to identify people over audio for long.
Amazon does that, and I think T-Mobile does that when you call in. So more sensitive services, anything in financial services should certainly do that. And I know at least two of the companies that I have accounts with that are, kind of important, use the quote voice recognition as the security factor. But yeah, you're right. It's not even just the different networks. What if I'm on the road in my car and there's road noise? What if I'm in the grocery store and there's background noise? Like all of that affects. What if I have a cold like I do today and my voice isn't exactly the same and the intonation is a little bit different? All of that matters. And with deepfakes, it's just so easy. And yeah, the SMS isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than just, oh, you sound like you might be Katie. My sister sounds like me, for Christ's sake. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I was impressed. I sent a wire transfer recently, and they asked me for 2 forms of ID, my ATM card with the PIN, and then they sent me a PIN over SMS, and I had to read it to them. So I was like, the first time I went to a banking location where it felt that it wasn't 100% based on, I've seen this guy before. It's got to be legit, right? So it's just going to get worse with the voice biometrics. And the thing that sucks is a lot of companies are using voice biometrics because security questions are not secure, right? You ask me for my mom's maiden name, everyone can find that, right? Like what's the first car you had or whatever. This is not safe. And so companies start throwing on the voice biometrics on top of that to help. But I don't think it'll last for a long time. So I guess we probably have a few years where there's going to be these vendors making tools to detect deepfake audio, probably in real time, right? There'll probably be a market for a while, but I don't think it can go on forever. I think at some point the fake stuff is just going to be so good.
Well, and you pointed out the problem with that is that the first time we saw a service like this, we talked about it in the show, and it was paste in some text and it'll tell you the likelihood that the text was AI generated. And I got excited about it, and I looked into it a little bit further, and I found, okay, so that's the free tool. The pay tool that they sell is to paste in that text and make it undetectable by their tool that detects whether or not it's, so to be able, the moment you figure out how to detect if something's a deep fake, you also unlock the ability to then modify it so that it can't be detected as a deep fake, right?
Right, and that's why I'm saying I don't think it's sustainable, right? Like in the short term, sure, but
Yeah, not directly, at least. Maybe indirect methods, like again, like we were talking about.
So just to be clear, you were really challenging people to make deep fakes of you making fart jokes. I think that's verbatim what you said.
That is not what I said.
I just want to make sure everyone heard.
But at some point in the future, so the name of the company is Delphi. Like somebody's going to have the idea, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could have grandma at the Thanksgiving table after she's gone, and somebody's going to show up and just be horrified. Like, it's just, I don't know that that's a good idea. Like I know in some places, like it was, what was it, Egypt, where it was traditional, pull out the mummified remains and sit them at the table for certain special days of the year. It's like the digital equivalent of
Black Mirror episode is bound to become reality, whether it's a good idea or not. So
yeah, that's the problem. Is good idea is not a requirement when getting funding for a startup. It's just, will it make money? So we'll see. And with that, thanks so much, Guillaume and Katie, for joining me today. It's a lot of fun news items to talk about today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me this time.
Yep. And a big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back next week. Bye-bye.